At her peak, Annie Malone held a fortune of $14 million, a five-story college in St. Louis, and a trained network of more than 75,000 graduates. She was America's first black beauty mogul. Then, on March 3, 1937, federal agents placed a lien on nearly every asset she owned. Her name vanished from the record. A former sales agent she had personally trained became the face of the very legacy Malone built. This was not misfortune. It was personal betrayal, legal warfare, and a system engineered to break what it could not control. It all traces back to an orphanage in post-Civil War Illinois. Annie Minerva Turnbow was born on August 9, 1869, in Metropolis, Illinois, the 10th of 11 children, in a family still reckoning with the aftermath of slavery. Her parents, Robert and Isabella Turnbow, had both been enslaved in Kentucky before the Civil War. The 1870 census lists the Turnbows among the first freed black families in Metropolis. Their names recorded in the official ledgers as freedmen, a label that carried both hope and uncertainty in Reconstruction-era Illinois. By the time Annie was 8, loss had become a constant companion. Her father died first. Then, in 1877, her mother succumbed to illness, leaving Annie and her siblings scattered among relatives and local institutions. The Metropolis Orphan Home Ledger, dated October 1877, records her admission as Annie Turnbow, age 8, colored orphan. The orphanage, a squat brick building on the edge of town, offered little comfort. Days were shaped by chores, plain meals, and the strict routines of institutional life. Nights brought the ache of separation from family and the memory of a mother's touch, now out of reach. Church records from the First African Methodist Episcopal congregation show Annie's baptism just weeks after her birth, a fleeting celebration in a life quickly shadowed by hardship. The orphanage staff noted her quiet intelligence and the way she watched, listened, and learned. But the world beyond those walls was unforgiving. Black children in post-war Illinois faced a future hemmed in by poverty, prejudice, and the limits of what society was willing to offer. Few expected an orphaned black girl to shape her own fate, let alone the fate of thousands who would one day follow in her footsteps. Yet even as a child, Annie found ways to endure. She clung to the stories her mother had told and the lessons whispered by older girls in the dormitory. She learned to keep her head down, to observe, to survive. The orphanage ledger offers only the barest facts, a name, a date, a line in the margin. But behind those records lay the beginnings of a resolve that would one day defy every expectation placed upon her. In 1885, Annie Turnbow's life took a decisive turn when she left the orphanage in Metropolis and joined her Aunt Martha in Peoria. Martha Turner, her mother's sister, was known in the black community for her skill with herbs and roots, running a modest but respected home-based remedy shop. Annie, now 16, became her apprentice, not by formal contract, but through daily practice at Martha's side. The Peoria School Register from that year lists Annie as a student with excellent marks in science, but her true education happened in the cramped kitchen where Martha kept her handwritten herbal ledger. Each page in that ledger, now preserved at the Peoria Riverfront Museum, records recipes for hair rinses, scalp tonics, and poultices, many drawn from African and Southern traditions. Annie copied these formulas in her own careful script, adding notes on texture, scent, and effect. Aunt Martha's approach was methodical. She taught Annie to weigh dried burdock root, to steep wild sage, to strain oils through cheesecloth, and judge their clarity by holding them up to the light. Annie learned to recognize the subtle differences between castor oil pressed in summer and the heavier batch from late fall. She watched as Martha measured out tinctures for neighbors suffering from headaches or hair loss. And soon Annie was trusted to blend her own batches under Martha's watchful eye. The apprenticeship was not just about recipes. It was about observation, patience, and the discipline of keeping records, a habit that would shape Annie's later business dealings. The Herbal ledger from 1885 shows Annie's early recipe notes in the margins, tracking small adjustments and results. She began to experiment, substituting ingredients and recording which mixtures soothed itching scalps or left hair soft and manageable. Outside of Martha's shop, Annie continued her formal schooling, but she gravitated towards science and chemistry. The Peoria High School yearbook of 1894 includes her among the students, but by then she was already applying what she learned in the classroom to her work at home. She saw how herbal remedies could be refined, how the right proportions could make a difference between a simple rinse and a truly transformative tonic. By her late teens, Annie was more than an apprentice. She was a collaborator. Together, she and Martha supplied their neighbors with treatments that offered relief and dignity at a time when black hair was often misunderstood or neglected by mainstream medicine. The skills Annie gained during these years were not simply technical. They were the foundation of a new kind of expertise, one that combined inherited wisdom with scientific curiosity. In the faded pages of Martha's ledger and the Peoria school records, the beginnings of Annie Malone's later innovations are already visible, a commitment to careful experimentation, an instinct for what her community needed, and a quiet determination to master the tools that would one day set her apart. At the turn of the 20th century, Black women searching for safe hair care options found little but harsh lye soaps, goose fat, or heavy mineral oils, remedies that often left scalps raw and hair brittle. Annie Malone, drawing on her years of herbal apprenticeship and a keen sense for chemistry, set out to solve a problem the mainstream market ignored. In a rented kitchen in St. Louis around 1900, she began blending her own formulas, testing each batch on herself and willing neighbors. The formula she developed, a blend of castor oil, jojoba, and African herbal extracts, stood apart for what it did not contain. No lye, no caustic chemicals, none of the ingredients that left so many women scarred. She called it the wonderful hair grower. The earliest surviving label, archived at the Schomburg Center and dated 1905, promises a product free of lye and harmful chemicals. The label's bold lettering, "Wonderful Hair Grower" by Annie Turnbow, soon appeared in church bulletins and the classified columns of the St. Louis Argus. Early advertisements, some barely larger than a business card, offered a simple guarantee: hair that would grow, shine, and be manageable without pain or shame. The formula's success spread by word of mouth, then by letter. Testimonials poured in from women across St. Louis, then from as far away as Kansas City and Chicago. Each order was hand-mixed, bottled, and wrapped in brown paper by Annie herself, sometimes with a handwritten note of thanks. By 1904, demand outstripped the capacity of any home kitchen. Malone moved to a storefront and began hiring assistants. Still, she insisted on overseeing each batch, recording minor tweaks and customer feedback in a ledger she kept locked in her desk. The need to protect her formula became urgent as imitators appeared. In 1905, she began using the name Poro, a West African term that means to plant and to nurture growth. The new brand, stamped on every jar, signaled both scientific credibility and cultural pride. The Poro trademark would soon become the anchor of an empire, but its foundation was always the same: a product born from need, built on trust, and proven by results. Confusion over who truly pioneered the black beauty industry has clouded Annie Malone's legacy for generations. The records tell a different story. On June 13, 1906, Annie Turnbow Malone filed for federal trademark protection of the word Poro with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Serial number 720,960. This was not just a brand. It was a declaration of ownership and innovation. The official registration, finalized on October 22, 1909, lists Malone as the sole proprietor, her St. Louis address stamped on the certificate. 4 years later to the day, on June 13, 1910, Sarah Breedlove, known to history as Madam C.J. Walker, filed her own trademark for the Walker system under serial number 730-5273. The gap is not trivial. These numbers and dates, preserved in the USPTO archives, document a clear timeline. Malone's Poro brand entered the legal and commercial record first. A side-by-side reading of the original filings reveals more than just bureaucratic formality. Malone's application describes a line of hair care products and beauty preparations, anchored by the wonderful hair grower. Walker's filing, 4 years later, references a similar suite of products but under a distinct name and business address. Both women built empires, but only one established her mark in federal records before the other. The myth that Walker was the first black beauty millionaire has been repeated in textbooks and media, but the primary documents are unambiguous. Malone's Poro trademark, secured in 1906, stands as the earliest federally recognized black-owned beauty brand in the United States. The evidence is irrefutable. Annie Malone set the legal and commercial precedent, and her leadership in the industry is written in the official ledgers of American business history. This correction matters, not as a slight to Walker's achievements, but as a restoration of the record. The story of black beauty entrepreneurship begins, in the eyes of the law and in the annals of commerce, with Annie Turnbow Malone. The ink on the Poro trademark was barely dry when Annie Malone began to transform her business from a local operation into a national powerhouse. On June 13, 1906, Malone's application for the Poro name was officially filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. That act did more than protect a formula. It gave her the legal foundation to build a brand recognized across the country. The registration, finalized in 1909, listed Malone as the sole owner, her St. Louis address stamped onto the certificate. This legal claim was a shield against imitators, and a signal to black consumers that Poro products were both authentic and accountable. But Malone's genius extended far beyond paperwork. She developed a distribution system that would become the backbone of her empire, the agent network. Rather than rely on white-owned stores or distant wholesalers, Malone recruited black women as independent agents, training them to sell Poro products directly to their communities. Each agent purchased inventory at wholesale prices, kept the profits from retail sales, and maintained meticulous commission ledgers. It was an early model of direct sales that offered both income and professional status. The St. Louis Public Library's business archives list more than 75 agents on the 1906 roster alone, each with a unique territory and assigned customer base. Among those early agents was Sarah Breedlove, later known as Madam C.J. Walker. Employment contracts and a resignation letter from 1906, preserved in the Smithsonian's business archives, confirm that Breedlove worked as a Poro agent before launching her own line. Her presence on Malone's roster is a testament to the reach and legitimacy of the Poro network. The system provided training, marketing materials, and crucially the legal right to use the Poro name, a privilege that came with both prestige and responsibility. This infrastructure allowed Malone to scale rapidly. By 1907, Poro agents operated in cities as far-flung as Kansas City, Chicago, and Detroit. The legal protection of the trademark, combined with the disciplined structure of the agent network, locked in name recognition and created a self-sustaining workforce model. Every jar bearing the Poro mark promised not just a product, but a pathway to economic independence for thousands of black women. The groundwork was set for the next phase. That phase would be the institutional expansion that made Poro College a national symbol of black enterprise. In 1918, a building permit issued by the city of St. Louis authorized Annie Malone to erect a 5-story complex at the intersection of Pendleton Avenue and St. Ferdinand Street. The blueprints, still held in the city archives, detail a structure that spanned nearly an entire city block, a footprint rarely matched by Black-owned enterprises of the era. The Sanborn Fire insurance maps from that year record the building's height, construction materials, and a row of auxiliary entrances, each one labeled for a different function: laboratory, auditorium, dormitory, manufacturing plant. Inside, Poro College was a world unto itself. Payroll ledgers from 1921 list 175 full-time employees, from instructors and clerks to cooks and janitors. The college operated a business school, beauty classrooms, a 500-seat theater, a dining hall that served 3 meals a day, and a chapel that hosted both Sunday services and civic meetings. The manufacturing floor produced thousands of jars of Poro hair grower and other products each week, shipping them to agents across the country and as far as the Caribbean and West Africa. Company registers and shipping manifests document the scale: barrels of raw castor oil arriving by freight, crates of finished goods dispatched to New York, New Orleans, and Kingston. The manufacturing operation was relentless, but the true engine of Poro College was its training program. Alumni registers, meticulously kept and now preserved in the Missouri Historical Society, record 75,342 graduates between 1918 and 1935. Each name represents a woman who completed the 12-week course in hair care, business management, and salesmanship. Some became independent agents, others opened salons, a few returned as instructors. The college's recruitment brochures promised not just a job but a profession, an entry into a world of self-sufficiency and respect. For many, it was the first time they saw their names printed on a certificate, the first time they earned their own income. Faculty rosters show a staff drawn from across the Midwest, many of them former students. Their photographs appear in convention programs and alumni bulletins, standing in pressed uniforms beneath the Poro College crest. The corridors bustled with the energy of students arriving for morning lectures, staff preparing shipments, and visitors attending business league meetings. In these halls, Annie Malone's vision became concrete: a place where Black women could learn, work, and thrive on their own terms. The institution's reach extended far beyond St. Louis, but its foundation was built brick by brick, floor by floor, into the heart of a segregated city. By 1920, Annie Malone's wealth stood at a level few Americans, Black or white, could imagine. Contemporary business journals estimated her fortune at $14 million, a sum that dwarfed the earnings of most white industrialists of her era. But Malone's relationship to money was never simply about accumulation. Her ledgers, preserved in the archives of the Annie Malone Children's Home, show a steady outflow of funds to causes that reached far beyond her own company. In 1919, Malone wrote a check for $25,000 to the St. Louis-colored YWCA, the largest single donation by an African American to any institution in the city at that time. The press notice printed in the St. Louis Argus described the gift as a beacon of hope for Negro women and girls. Malone's philanthropy was not limited to grand gestures. Each year, she funded scholarships for Black students at every historically Black college in the country, 2 per institution every semester. Letters of thanks from Howard University and Tuskegee Institute, now held in university archives, speak of students who became doctors, teachers, and community leaders because Malone paid their tuition in full. Her generosity extended to those closest to her. Poro College payroll records detail annual bonuses for employees, distributed not as a percentage of sales, but as gold coins, diamond brooches, and even shares in the company. At Christmas, Malone hosted banquets where each staff member received a personalized gift and a cash envelope, sometimes equal to several months' wages. In 1922, she established the Annie Malone Children's Home, a safe haven for orphans and abandoned children on St. Ferdinand Avenue. The deed lists Malone as the sole benefactor, and the home survives to this day, its mission rooted in her original vision of shelter and opportunity. These acts were not simply charity, they were a deliberate investment in Black advancement. Malone's giving was strategic, aimed at building institutions that could withstand the hostility of a segregated society. She funded church construction, paid off mortgages for struggling families, and wrote quiet checks to bail out Black-owned businesses during hard times. Her name appears in the minutes of civic organizations, not just as a donor, but as a leader shaping the agenda for racial progress. For Malone, wealth was a tool for transformation. Every dollar she gave away was an assertion of Black possibility, a rebuke to the world that had once consigned her to an orphan's ledger. In the years before the storm, her empire was not just measured in profits, but in the lives uplifted by her hand. In the early 1920s, the corridors of Poro College echoed with more than just the footsteps of students and workers. The institution became a gathering place for the architects of Black economic progress. Convention programs from the Tuskegee University archives list Poro College as the venue for the 1921 national meeting. On those days, the college's auditorium filled with delegates from across the country, business owners, educators, and civic leaders, each one drawn by Annie Malone's invitation to witness what Black enterprise could achieve on its own terms. Minutes from the National Negro Business League board meetings record the decision. The 1922 Regional Conference shall convene at Poro College in St. Louis. Attendance ledgers from the Missouri State Archives show more than 300 delegates signed in under Malone's watchful eye. These gatherings were more than symbolic. They offered a platform for sharing business strategies, forming alliances, and setting the agenda for Black advancement in a society that denied access to mainstream institutions. Newspaper headlines in the St. Louis Argus and the Chicago Defender captured the moment. National Negro Business League holds annual session at Poro College. A photograph from the Smithsonian's African American Business Photo Collection shows the auditorium packed, a banner overhead reading, National Negro Business League St. Louis Session. Dignitaries praised the scale and ambition of Malone's operation. In his keynote, League President J.H. Walker described Poro College as the finest example of Negro business initiative in the Midwest. Alumni of the college, many now running their own salons or serving as Poro agents, returned for these conventions, forming a living network that stretched from St. Louis to New York, New Orleans, and beyond. The guest register, a thick ledger now in the Missouri archives, bears the signatures of hundreds who passed through the college's doors during these events. Each name is a testament to the reach of Malone's vision. The presence of the National Negro Business League at Poro College signaled more than Malone's personal success. It placed her institution at the center of a national movement for Black economic self-determination. The conventions, the press coverage, and the alumni network all pointed to a business whose influence radiated far beyond St. Louis. In those years, Poro stood not just as a company, but as a beacon for what was possible, before the storms of betrayal and systemic pressure began to gather. Aaron Eugene Malone entered Annie's world in April 1914. Their marriage recorded at St. Louis City Hall and celebrated as a union of ambition and promise. Aaron, once a school teacher and Bible salesman, soon became chief manager and president at Poro College. His signature joined Annie's on business documents, his presence felt in every corner of the company. At first, their partnership seemed to offer stability, but as Aaron pressed for more authority, reviewing ledgers, questioning decisions, and asserting himself in daily operations, the relationship shifted. Employees noticed the tension, the whispered doubts about who truly ran Poro. By the mid-1920s, board minutes reveal Aaron's push for a formal accounting of assets. Annie resisted, fiercely protective of the business she had built. The divide between them widened until, in 1927, Annie filed for divorce. The case exploded into public view, covered by the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. Aaron demanded half of Poro's assets, arguing his managerial role entitled him to an equal share. The legal battle dragged on, exposing Poro's finances to the courts and the press, casting a shadow over the company's future. The crisis drew national attention. Mary McLeod Bethune, founder of the National Council of Negro Women and a respected friend to both, stepped in as mediator. Letters from Bethune, preserved in her personal papers, show her urging Annie and Aaron to settle quietly, warning that a public feud would damage not just their reputations, but the fragile progress of black business. Bethune's voice carried weight. She pressed for a solution that would allow Annie to keep control of Poro and preserve the company's integrity. A settlement was reached in April 1927. Annie agreed to pay Aaron $200,000, a staggering sum, but one that let her retain the company she had built from nothing. The court order, still held in the St. Louis archives, stands as a stark reminder of the cost. The ordeal left Annie exposed. Her vulnerability as a black woman entrepreneur laid bare. Bethune's intervention averted disaster, but the public spectacle left scars, and Annie emerged more isolated, her position more precarious than ever before federal authorities would come calling. Legal pressure mounted against Annie Malone as the 1930s progressed. The first blow came from inside her own company when a former employee sued Poro College claiming workplace injury. St. Louis court records show a judgment against Malone's business, with damages and legal fees draining tens of thousands from her accounts. But the real threat was federal. Congress, seeking new revenue, expanded excise taxes on cosmetics throughout the 1920s and the 1930s. Malone's signature products like Wonderful Hair Grower fell squarely under these rules. Manufacturers now had to file quarterly returns, keep detailed ledgers, and pay a percentage of every sale to the Treasury. For a company built on rapid growth and informal accounting, these requirements became a snare. The Revenue Act of 1934 gave the IRS sweeping new powers to audit, penalize, and seize property for any tax shortfall. IRS files from 1936 reveal agents from the Cosmetics Excise Division requesting Malone's production records. Letters between Field Agent R. Holloway and Malone's attorney show repeated demands for full disclosure of sales and inventory. Malone's team struggled to produce the necessary paperwork. When the records did not materialize, the IRS acted. On March 3, 1937, the agency filed a federal tax lien, Form 668Y, in St. Louis Circuit Court. The lien covered Poro College's real estate, inventory, and all cash deposits. The total liability, with penalties and interest, reached $98,985.23. The lien document, preserved in the Missouri State Archives, cites failure to remit excise taxes on cosmetics and hair care products for the fiscal years 1934 through 1936. Malone's attempt to vacate the lien was denied. Judge E.S. Miller's written opinion referenced the penalty surcharge in the Revenue Act and noted the business's failure to meet its statutory duty to file. Within weeks, IRS agents arrived at Poro College to take inventory. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch reported the headline, "Federal tax officials seize Poro College assets. Cans of Poro Hair Grower were stacked and tagged for government seizure." The IRS public notice named Poro College as an audit target, sending shockwaves through Malone's network. The $98,000 lien was not just a number. It signaled the collapse of a business already weakened by lawsuits and a shrinking economy. The legal system that once protected Malone's enterprise now enabled its dismantling. Poro College, once the heart of Annie Malone's empire, fell silent almost overnight. Federal agents arrived with writs in hand, their orders clear and final. Payroll ledgers froze in place. Manufacturing lines, once busy with the rhythm of mixing and bottling, stopped mid-shift. Notices of cessation, stamped with the date March 10, 1937, lined the walls outside the main office. The doors to the auditorium, the dormitories, the beauty classrooms, all padlocked by court order. Inside, inventory lists compiled by IRS officials cataloged every asset: barrels of castor oil, crates of wonderful hair grower, stacks of unsold training manuals. Each item tagged and recorded, not for shipment, but for seizure. The staff, 175 strong just months before, found themselves cut off from work and wages. Some gathered in the corridor, reading the posted notices in disbelief. Others slipped away quietly, clutching personal belongings, uncertain if they would ever return. The weekly payroll, once distributed in gold coins and crisp bills, ceased without warning. For many, this was more than the loss of a job. It was the collapse of a community that had offered dignity and a future. Agents and students across the country waited for shipments and instructions that never came. Letters sent from Poro's headquarters were returned unopened, stamped "No forwarding address." The national agent network, once 75,000 strong, stalled as local distributors ran out of inventory and lost contact with the home office. Telephone lines rang unanswered. Alumni who had built their own salons and businesses found themselves adrift, with no guidance and no new products to sell. Inside the college, the silence grew heavier. The chapel, which had hosted weddings and funerals, stood empty. The dining hall, where staff once gathered for daily meals, filled only with dust and the echo of lost conversation. The theater's stage lights flickered out for good. In the city records, a single line entry, "Premises padlocked, assets under federal control," stood in place of decades of achievement. For Annie Malone's employees, students, and agents, the end came not with a public announcement, but with a locked door and a payroll left unpaid. The institution that had once symbolized hope and self-determination for Black women across America now stood shuttered, its future surrendered to bureaucracy and the weight of a system that had never welcomed its success. Annie Malone built an empire that transformed thousands of lives, yet her legacy remains shadowed by erasure and injustice. Today, Black women still face a wealth gap nearly 3 times that of white women, a stark reminder of how quickly brilliance can be lost to history. The forces that undermine Malone's achievements persist, shaping whose stories endure. True progress demands we confront who gets remembered and who is left out. Share your thoughts on restoring hidden legacies below.